perspective right now is to be taken seriously in the charity space. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I believe that Harry is finally taking advice from seasoned PR experts that are saying, you know what, your wife's brand is toxic. To me, I don't think Harry would make that decision on his own. He's so stubborn. He sacrificed so much for Meghan, and I can't see him admitting defeat or admitting that he made a mistake. And in allowing PR experts to make these observations and following their direction, his hands are clean, and he won't necessarily get the wrath of Meghan Markle.
Now, Harry reportedly spent his 40th birthday away from Meghan, instead hiking with his friends.
They do say that Meghan Markle is ultimately the one that planned this trip, so maybe we are being too sensitive about this, but seeing him doing his favorite thing in the world, going to Africa, to, you know, the Well Child Awards, I think that is more alarming.
Let's talk about Prince Andrew, who's got a headache. He's on the clock. What's going on?
Yeah, that's right. He is in jeopardy of violating the Crown Estate's lease rules, which specifically outline that repairs on Royal Lodge must be made to the property in regular intervals. Otherwise, they can terminate that lease agreement. The Express reports that the Duke has been given up until the end of the year to prove that he has the financial resources to refurbish Royal Lodge, or he's going to get the boot. He's going to be evicted.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm going to be speaking to the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, about Labour's new plan for workers and also this row over P&O Ferries. I'm also going to be joined by the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride. And I'll be joined by Tory leadership hopeful Robert Jenrick, who has made it into the final two for the Battle of the Righties. But will he still be the leading man at the end of the race? And the Labour MP for Dover and Deal, Mike Tapp, will be here to react to that interview with Jenrick, along with the pollster Scarlett Maguire. And we'll be speaking to the author Paul Moorcraft to share his book on Israel's forever war. We've got 90 minutes of punchy politics ahead. Don't go anywhere. So we're waiting for Jonathan Reynolds to be ready after he's done an interview at another side of London. So just before we do that, normally we have the papers at this time. We're going to have a little bit of the papers, bring in the Business Secretary and then go back to the papers. Hope everyone's happy with that. And to join me to go through the papers is Nicholas Owen, the former BBC broadcaster. Nicholas, lovely to see you. Let's do, first of all, Alex Salmond's death. Yes. And then I reckon somebody's going to say in my ear that the Business Secretary's ready and we'll go to him. But let's see how much of the papers we can get through before we speak to Jonathan Reynolds.
Completely understood, yes.
You had experience interviewing Alex Salmond. I mean, it's a big shock, this. Nobody wasn't ill. He's died suddenly.
Yes,
it's sort of like leading light of the independence movement in Scotland. Not the easiest man to interview.
No, the big word that's always used about Alex Salmond, wasn't it? I mean, the polite words were divisive, and certainly was that. When it came to the professional job, sitting where you are now, Camilla, I had a very small blacklist, as I called it, of people that I didn't like interviewing. Very small. I think it only had 2 names on it. And, you know, I can't remember the other name for some reason, but Alex Salmond was. He was just you could never get through. You could never... It didn't matter about the subject. You know, whatever we were talking about, Scottish independence, of course, was his thing, and that's fine. But a straight answer to a straight question, they're always difficult, politicians, as you're going to find out just now, I know.
Just now? Yes. Well, let's see if I can get straight answers to straight questions with the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, who joins me now, having rushed from another interview. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely to see you this morning. Look, I feel a bit sorry for you, Mr Reynolds, because you're on the broadcast round this morning to talk about this great investment summit that you've got going tomorrow. You've got people from all over the world coming in, saying that they want to invest big bucks in Britain, and yet it's been overshadowed by the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, making these choice remarks about P&O. There's even a press release, a government press release here, describing P&O Ferries as a rogue employer, and yet their parent company, DP Group, is poised to invest $1 billion in Britain. So surely the Transport Secretary has to apologise.
Oh, good morning. Yes, nice to be with you. And I am very excited by the investment summit and the money coming into the UK. But look, specifically on this issue, that's not the government's position. The issue, obviously, with P&O Ferries is we're not going to recoil from that. We thought it was wrong, the fire and rehire that we saw, those workers being sacked and then taken back on fewer terms and conditions. But we have changed the law. It was lawful under the Conservative government. It will be unlawful under this Labour government. So where companies accept that, acknowledge that, can work within that framework, we'll of course talk to them about investments, and I can tell you they're coming to the summit and the investment will go ahead.
OK, but isn't this the problem, perhaps, Mr Reynolds, with trying to be both a government of business and a government of the workers, that you're always going to have these contradictions? Some on the left might think, oh, you're completely overlooking the rogue tactics of P&O because basically you've got your eye on a bigger prize, which is the $1 billion that's been committed by DP Group. So, you know, it's a little bit like the politics of Marx, except it's Groucho. Here are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others.
Well, look, the point is, the key policy point is, we believe fire and hire is wrong. That's why in the employment bill we will make it unlawful. It's changes to how that process works. We'll also, by the way, change some of the maritime laws that allowed this to go ahead at the time that it did under the Conservative government. So we're not changing that position. But of course, where people accept that is not now going to be possible in the UK and can still work with us, we will do so and take it forward. And look, for me, the big picture is always going to be, not only do I think a government can be pro-business and pro-worker, I think it's what's required. I think people in insecure work need better terms and conditions. That's part of what we've announced this week in the employment bill. But I think the country needs higher business investment for good jobs for the future. I think it needs more inward investment. I think we've got to compete harder. I don't think we should be losing out to investments to the French, as we've seen in the last few years. Look, so I think genuinely it's not just about the politics of how you pitch the government. What we need is exactly that platform. Now, what I'm pleased to be able to say is, if you take this week, we've presented that employment bill, big improvement for low-paid workers on fire and rehire, zero-hours contracts, sick pay, unfair dismissal, and at the same time, record amounts of investment coming to the UK next week to the Investment Summit. So the proof really is, just if we can do it. And right now, the evidence is that is possible, that is right for the UK, and that's what we're doing.
OK. I mean, Business Secretary, the Federation of Small Businesses has not reacted well to the plans. They've called this proposed legislation a rushed job, clumsy, chaotic and poorly planned. Is it perhaps a reflection of the fact that nobody in the Cabinet have actually ever run a business, that the FSB would react like this? Perhaps you can't identify because none of you have done the job of FSB members.
Well, look, first of all, let me say you could look at the quotes from the CBI or Make UK in response to the package. We've been particularly sensitive to the needs of small business. That's why that point about probationary periods, so small business can hire with confidence, knowing if it doesn't work out when they employ someone, they've got a lighter touch process at the initial part of the employment contract to end that relationship. And I think that's consistent with giving people stronger rights. And look, the test of any government is, do they deliver on their promises? Can they deliver on the things? 100 days into this government, we've got that employment rights bill. I've been criticised for going too fast and too slow on that. That's the nature of a job like this. But we've got that in place. We've got the investment summit happening. The two things alongside each other, exactly the prescription that Britain needs. Higher investment, but better rights, better paying conditions for working people being generated by that. That's what this government's committed to. And the success or failure of that is whether it happens. I'm really proud to be able to tell you it is happening.
OK. Why wasn't Elon Musk invited this year? He was invited last year. Obviously, his company could invest in the UK and probably create a significant number of jobs that would help Labour's growth agenda. So why has he been vetoed from this year's summit?
No, we've got 300 of the most significant investors, business figures, world investors coming to the UK. I don't think it's right to say why a given person may or may not be invited. I mean, you will know the big Tesla investment has gone to Germany in terms of the Gigafactory, so there'll only be one of those in Europe. And I am really excited and confident by the people who are coming, people who can make decisions that will bring significant amounts of capital to the UK, significant levels of investment, benefiting every part of the UK. That's the criteria. There's no other criteria put on people being invited to the summit. And look, it's going to be a really exciting time to announce what that will mean for Britain.
People might assume it's because he said some controversial things about the UK on his platform X, and because he's aligned to Donald Trump, who your colleague David Lammy has been pretty critical of in the past. Is that why Musk hasn't been invited this year?
Look, if you look at the attendees who are flying into the UK for this summit, they would cover a whole range of different political viewpoints, different sectors, different parts of the world that they're from. So it's not some sort of political filter on who the attendees are. It's about who can make the kind of investments, who can we showcase the brilliant things about the UK and the fundamental change in our investability following the election, because we've got stability and an openness to the world that wasn't there in the past. Who can bring those investments? That's the criteria. And like the judgment on whether those were the right people will be when we see the investment figures coming out of it.
We talked about the FSB earlier, and I interviewed somebody from the FSB earlier in the week who was making the point that Labour was really clear during the campaign that there would be no increase to employer national insurance contributions. I know that Rachel Reeves has repeatedly said about not putting up the taxes of working people, but it was also suggested that employers' national insurance would not go up. And yet Rishi Sunak, the leader of the opposition, seems to suggest that maybe the Treasury was planning something on that. He made a point about it at Prime Minister's questions. Can you rule out now for us an increase to national insurance contributions made by employers, not least because the FSB seems to be insisting that the Labour Party gave them that guarantee during the campaign?
No, Camilla, you know I'm not going to preempt a budget just a few days out from it.
Go on.
In terms of our manifesto commitments, it was specifically taxes on working people, so income tax, VAT, employees, national insurance, as well, of course, as a roadmap on things like corporation tax to give businesses stability around that. But the key point here is that the UK needs consistent, stable policy for a decade, not just for 1 year. And actually what I'd say to Rishi Sunak, with all politeness, is if he didn't want speculation about what's in or not in the budget, he shouldn't have left such a mess for us to come in and get. I mean, he had made flagship pledges, things he said were his legacy, this British education standard and all of that. No money put aside for that, no money put aside for public sector pay settlements. So he is responsible for the speculation in some degrees that we're talking about today, but people have to wait just a short period of time for the first budget of the government, the first one by the new Chancellor, and it will be a budget for growth. She's made that absolutely clear.
All right, we'll wait for that budget for growth on October the 30th. Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan Reynolds, for joining us on a very busy morning for you. Great to see you. Well, that was Jonathan Reynolds there, the Business Secretary. Let's bring Nicholas Owen back in because we're going to be discussing the news. Are we going to a break first? I'm just trying to work out. No, we're going to have a break first. Hold that thought. We've talked about Alex Salmond, but we're going to be talking next about that P&O story. And also, we're going to be discussing Taylor Swift and whether she should have had a police escort to her gigs in London. So don't go anywhere for that. Right. We'll be back with the papers in 3.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
So I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm going to see your show, Behind the Shoulder Pads, one night only at the Adelphi Theatre, October the 22nd. You're talking about your extraordinary life. Stage, screen, published author, 19 books, TV, most important.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who's managed to straddle, what, 7, 8 decades in showbiz and still be at the top?
Yes, I was thinking about that the other day because somebody said, you know, the last of the good. There is a Shirley MacLaine.
Sure.
She started the same time as me.
Right.
Sophia Loren.
Yeah.
She started around the same time.
She's not working much, though.
It's true, she's not, but she's still out there being, you know, a major icon. And of course, people like Dick Van Dyke, who's just almost 100.
Yeah, he's incredible,
you know,
isn't he?
I'm a mere babe next to him.
You are. But and I was thinking about, you've written some extraordinary, wicked, waspish diaries, which of course you can because you've worked with so many people. Look at the names: Frank Sinatra, Lana Turner, Elizabeth Taylor, Dean Martin, Gregory Peck,
Richard Burton,
Paul Newman. The list goes on.
Gene Kelly,
and
my
Gene
favourite.
Kelly. Was he your favourite?
Yes.
Why?
Because I saw him in a movie when I was a little girl called For Me and My Gal with Judy Garland, and I just fell in love with him. It's such a cute movie. Well, they don't make movies like that anymore. And then I was lucky enough when I first went to Hollywood at age 20 to meet him and literally hang out with him and his friends. And then I put him in a movie with me that I produced. He played my husband in a movie called Sins. And he was wonderful. He was really wonderful.
The People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. So we've just interviewed the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. Different way of doing things today because that was the only time he was free. So now we're going to have a look at the papers with former BBC broadcaster Nicholas Owen. We've discussed the sad death of Alex Salmond. Let's move on now. Just to put a bit more meat on the bones of that conversation I've just had with the Business Secretary about P&O. Look, P&O did this whole fire and rehire thing where they got rid of workers and then replaced them with cheaper agency workers.
Lots of them.
At the time, the left was absolutely up in arms about all this. The government has released this press release basically saying, well, we're going to do better things for workers' rights and used P&O as an example of a rogue employer. That's a bit awkward because they've got DP Group, which is the parent company, coming to this investment summit tomorrow, pledging to invest £1 billion. There's clearly a row that's taken place between Starmer and the Leader's Office and Jonathan Reynolds and then Louise Haigh as Transport Secretary. She doubled down on this claim that P&O were a rogue employer in the week. It's all looking a bit messy. I mean, I put the question to Reynolds there, is it difficult to both be the party of business and the party of workers? And I think it's increasingly turning out that it is.
Absolutely right. I mean, it also shows, doesn't it, that in Downing Street and the surrounding area, people not talking to each other, not coordinating at all. Somebody should have tipped off the Transport Secretary that she was going to have to talk, almost certainly going to be asked about all these difficult things and be very, very careful with this great summit coming up. I mean, the fact that she walked straight into it. Mind you, it must be remembered the last Conservative government also condemned P&O. I mean, everybody's willing to
this is the trouble, isn't
throw
it?
rubbish over them.
Why I made that point about Groucho Marx's principles quote, right, is that if you are on the left and you have made an absolute stand against P&O, do you then have to just turn around and say, as a matter of principle, we're not going to take any money from parent companies of P&O because we've fallen on that sword? This is the contradiction, isn't it?
It is a contradiction.
I mean, they come along with £1 billion and suddenly is all that forgotten? Is everything that happened to those workers forgotten for this bigger prize?
Yes.
I mean, pragmatists would say, just take the investment.
Well, of course, you've got to take the investment. And we've got Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. One hopes that Rachel Reeves and her people are talking to all these other people and Mr Reynolds' department and Ms Haig's department, because Rachel Reeves has talked about nothing but growth is the important thing, encouraging business and everything else. It is a wonderful business they've got themselves into. I thought Reynolds, actually, the business secretary, I thought he handles it quite well. I was quite impressed, can I say, quite impressed by him.
Fair enough.
We live at a time when our Prime Minister does not seem to be able to do anything without having the notes in front of him very nervously like that. And his performances leave one feeling a little uneasy, shall we say. That man has got it right. If he's talking that way with other industrialists, with people around the world, OK, not Elon Musk, and I don't blame them for not having Musk in the room, frankly. What a nightmare thought, but they were...
Well, he was there last year, and at the end of the day, I mean, Tesla, if Tesla invested in... He made the point about, oh, well, Tesla's now invested in Germany. Well, you should nurture that relationship to see if he'd invest in the UK. He's not short of a
Do we
few
know?
more.
I'm not sure whether we know whether Musk was ever invited or not, or whether they
He was invited last year.
He was invited
and he
last
has
year.
complained on his platform X that he hasn't been invited this year. It can't be coincident that it's under a Labour government and they think he's probably too aligned with the right, don't they? I mean, that was the suggestion I put to the business secretary. He batted it away.
Well, they're going to get themselves into all sorts of trouble because there are a lot of other big industrialists too. If you start going down the list, I hope that other newspaper people, journalists are sitting down going through this list and looking, what did he say about them? My goodness me.
Yeah, so he was invited last year and wasn't this year, so I don't know. Yes.
Can of worms time.
Industrialist and entrepreneur with billions in the bank in righty shock. Labour are going to have to deal with these people whether they agree with their politics or not. Shall we talk about Taylor Swift? Why not? Are you a Swiftie, Nick?
Not at all. No, can't understand, of course. But
you're familiar with her work.
I am. I remember the reaction of one of my grandsons, actually, who, when he was told he was going to get a ticket, you know, he was with joy unconfined.
It's like Willy Wonka's factory tour, isn't it, getting a Taylor Swift ticket? I didn't get any tickets, and I certainly didn't get any for free, but the same cannot be said of Labour and, indeed, many members of the Cabinet. We've got Starmer and his wife, Lady Victoria, having gone twice, I think. Actually, I should be calling her Lady Starmer. It's not the correct...
Yes, Lady Starmer.
If she's an aristocrat, she's Lady Victoria. Yeah. If she has inherited the title in a way from her husband, then she's Lady Starmer. Yeah. So tell us about this story in the front of the Mail on Sunday.
Well, it is a wonderful tale that originally Taylor Swift was simply going to... I don't know how she was going to get around London. Probably a helicopter was going to run her in anyway. But no, it was decided there would be a proper police escort. And that's an expensive business, obviously, and only a very limited number of people are entitled to it.
This is something you give to
senior members of the royal family, prime minister, and that's about it. Have all the outriders and everything else. But there was then a discussion apparently involving the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, and they said, "Oh no, this woman must be given a police escort." And then pressure was put on allegedly by the Attorney General. Went back to the police. The police, having said they would not do it because it didn't fit what they call the protocol. Yes. In other words, not the right person. But it must be remembered. One thing should be remembered. There was a business in Austria, wasn't there, with Taylor Swift, where she was there was a threat, a credible threat, that there was going to be some terrible thing, a bomb go off at her concert or whatever. So I think security concerns, there were some concerns there, just in the...
I agree. I don't want Taylor Swift to be exposed to any unnecessary harm whatsoever, but it just raises questions because this special request came after all of these free tickets were handed out to cabinet ministers, and I think that looks a little bit opaque. Second of all, what implications might this have, funny enough, for another person who's in the public eye, Prince Harry? Prince Harry had been arguing and has been arguing through the courts with the Home Office and the Met that when he comes to the UK with his family, he should have taxpayer-funded protection because he's in a special category, not least because he was in the army and he has admitted in his book of killing Taliban. It makes him a risk and he's under threat. So I think it's interesting that Labour Party have carved out one rule for Swift and not for others. And is it a slippery slope? And who ends up paying for it? And how much does it cost us?
I'm not sure the outriders do that much good. I mean, police outriders, and I know this, I've been pulled over by a police outrider going, "Dyke, that stop," and then suddenly a member of the royal family dashes past. It's more for show, it's more for getting through the traffic, isn't it? Whether it's about security or not.
And presumably she has a very robust security team around her at all times
sure
anyway, not because of rogue people, just because she gets mobbed wherever she goes. She's so popular. Should we talk about 100 days of hard labour, we're calling it, because... according to this More in Common polling that appears in the Sunday Times, the direction of travel for at least Starmer's approval rating is tanking. It's going down.
It's absolutely gone right through the floor, hasn't it? Gone right through the floor.
A few stunning statistics. Well, I thought the most interesting figure from that polling was that people, 34% of people think that the Tories were better than Labour, and the people who thought that Labour are now better than the Tories is 31.
Yes.
So more people now think that the Tories, despite 14 years of Tory failure, were better than the current administration 101 days in.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Well, I remember when the election result came out, no surprise, and etc. My wife said to me, 6 months' time, people will be regretting, you know, it'll be, people will wish they had the Tories back. 6 months? It's, as you say, 100 days. I mean, it was almost within the first week, wasn't it, that the polls were beginning to turn around the other way.
I mean, it's always the case, isn't it, that you campaign and everyone gets very excited and they want change, change, change. They're now level pegging with the Tories, I think, on 27 points each. I think Reform's bringing up the rear on around 22, 23. As I said, we've now got Keir Starmer's approval rating at -38. By comparison, Rishi Sunak's is at -31. Neither of these are glowing endorsements,
no, they're
by
not.
the way.
Of course they're not. They're not.
It's not looking great.
But 4 3/4 years is a long time to
Indeed
go.
so.
And a huge majority, don't forget that.
And then a very quick word about, well, I just wanted to ask you as a former BBC newsreader what you made of Clive Myrie having this row, a four-letter rant at student who accused him of pro-Israel bias. The student walked out of this meeting that he had, and he was very cross about it. This was a Q&A session at a university in London.
Yeah, well, what Clive was doing, the job that he is absolutely, at the BBC, you are supposed to do, being even-handed. And we live in a time, we live in this strange, poisonous time, when to be even-handed is to upset people to the point where they say, you are biased. And this has always been a problem. I mean, I always remember doing the sort of job that Clive does, I always took great comfort from the days when people accused me of being very anti one person. And, you know, people would write in the ways that they did in those days, and then an equal number would say that I was on their side. You know,
yes.
you could
Did that
never
then
win
mean
these
that you were doing a good job?
Well, I would have taken it.
You're getting criticised by both sides.
Absolutely, absolutely. But Clive, I mean, he perhaps Clive, careful with the language.
What, effing and blinding?
Keeping it down. But he's right to react in that way. It's so frustrating, isn't it, when you hear that sort of nonsense said to you? Absolutely. My sympathies.
The trouble with this situation, by the way, was that the student kind of made this remark, said, you're biased, and you're this and you're that, and then just walked out, rather than sustaining a debate about whether he was biased or not. So then Myrie turns around and says, well, he's just a, quotes, effing idiot, because he's walked out without having the debate. In general, do you think the BBC has struggled to cover the Middle East? We had that Trevor Assassin report a few weeks ago, finding lots of incidences where the report found that the BBC was biased. Lots of criticism made of BBC Arabic, that particular individual channel, for not covering the war in a straight enough fashion. What's your view?
I think it's very difficult because one of the things that the BBC has done in the old days, BBC foreign correspondents were big people, and they went out and they reported on the wars, and they had terrific, terrible disputes around the world and violent things. These days they depend on a lot of local people to do the same sort of job. That's partly economics, I'm afraid, and I think there has been some pretty, can I put it no higher than doubtful reporting from some of these people. I think there's been a lot of that. And also the choice of language, it's this old business about can you use the word terrorists or people accused of being terrorists and so on. It's a terrible minefield. But I think the BBC have got to be jolly careful. Jolly careful.
I mean, it might also be because younger staff come in and they're kind of, you know, got a certain view on the Middle East. Might infect coverage.
Yes, I know. I mean, I always remember, I don't know whether I've told the story to you on this programme before, but I'm happy to do it again. There was the old accusation made that, BBC journalists were all absolutely sort of Guardian readers to a man. And I always remember sitting in the BBC newsroom one day when the head of news came roaring in looking for someone to shout at. And it was usually me sitting there. And he said, I can't believe this. He said, when I go around the newsroom, I'm told you're all Guardian readers. The only paper I see everybody reading all the time is the Daily Mail.
Well, I thought we were going to say Daily Telegraph, and I'd be happy with the end of that anecdote. Nicholas Owen, thank you very much indeed for taking us through the papers this morning. Coming up next, well, there's lots more to come. I'm going to be speaking to Mel Stride, the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, and Robert Jenrick. Can he beat Kemi Badenoch? We'll see. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in 3 with all of that and more.
There's only 2 and good luck.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
You must be so proud of your daughter being so just amazingly brave and a model for other people who face illness.
I think we're proud of her all day, every day, and always have been. Liz has always given her all to anything she put her mind to, whether that was studying for her GCSE exams at school or whether it's been her photography and battling cancer. Liz never does anything by half, and we are so incredibly proud of her each and every day.
And Liz, I noticed a wonderful line from you saying that when you've got cancer, A-levels don't matter so much. That seems to me to be a very reasonable view to take and has given you then the chance to do these other amazing things that you will be doing more of in future with the London Ambulance Service. And I imagine many people will want to help you with your bucket list because they've now seen you and seen how brave you are.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we've already been overwhelmed by the responses and the support by so many people. I think when my mum originally posted the list, it received like 4,000 replies. It was insane, and still there's more. So from the bottom of our hearts, and especially mine, we just want to say thank you, because there's nothing that forces anyone to get in touch and say, hey, I have something you can do, pop over and do this or that, or it's just out of the generosity of their hearts. So thank you.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. So much more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride and Tory leadership hopeful Robert Jenrick. But first, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Camilla, thank you very much and good morning. The top stories. The King says he's greatly saddened by the sudden death of Alex Salmond, the former First Minister of Scotland. The Alba leader died yesterday afternoon at the age of 69 from a suspected heart attack during a trip to North Macedonia. In a message issued by Buckingham Palace, King Charles also said his devotion to Scotland drove his decades of public service. We extend our deep condolences to his family and loved ones at this time. Mr Salmond had made a speech at the Institute for the Cultural Diplomacy Forum and is understood to have collapsed at lunchtime in a crowded room. The Alba Party said it understood he'd suffered a heart attack, although there will be a post-mortem examination to confirm the cause of death. Well, tributes continue to be paid across the political spectrum. Tony Blair saying he was very sorry to hear of his death. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, had this to say. Alex Salmond was a monumental figure of Scottish and UK politics. He leaves behind a lasting legacy. The former First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, said she was shocked and sorry, adding, I cannot pretend that the events of the past few years which led to the breakdown of our relationship did not happen. However, it remains the fact that for many years, Alex was an incredibly significant figure in my life, and we formed one of the most successful partnerships in UK politics. In other news, Jonathan Reynolds says it's not the government's position that P&O Ferries is a rogue operator, despite a press release this week calling them a rogue employer. P&O Ferries owner DP World will attend the International Investment Summit tomorrow. Now, they'd previously threatened to pull out of that event and a £1 billion port investment. That's after the Transport Secretary Louise Hay criticised their employment strategy and called for a boycott. Sir Keir Starmer says Ms Haig's call for that boycott of the ferry firm was not the view of the government. The operator was criticised by politicians from both main parties in March 2022 when it suddenly sacked 800 British seafarers and replaced them with cheaper, mainly overseas staff, saying it was necessary to stave off bankruptcy. Well, the Business Secretary told GB News' Camilla Tominey this morning that the £1 billion investment will go ahead.
Quickly on this issue, that's not the government's position. The issue, obviously, with P&O Ferries is we're not going to recoil from that. We thought it was wrong, the fire and rehire that we saw, those workers being sacked and then taken back on fewer terms and conditions. But we have changed the law. It was lawful under the Conservative government. It will be unlawful under this Labour government. So where companies accept that, acknowledge that, can work within that framework, we'll, of course, talk to them about investments. And I can tell you they're coming to the summit and the investment will go ahead.
The UK is among 40 nations strongly condemning attacks on United Nations peacekeepers in Lebanon. Earlier this week, Israeli troops fired on UN headquarters in southern Lebanon, injuring 2 peacekeepers for the second time in as many days. It comes as Lebanon's health ministry says at least 15 people have been killed in the last day by Israeli airstrikes on 3 different villages. That's after the Israeli military accused Hezbollah of firing over 300 projectiles at Israel. Meanwhile, Hezbollah rocket barrages triggered sirens across northern Israel overnight and early this morning. In Haifa, the 3rd biggest Israeli city and host of one of the country's biggest naval ports, sirens and explosions blared across the bay, and people rushed to a nearby bomb shelter. An Israeli army spokesperson said in a statement that 5 projectiles were identified crossing from Lebanon into Israeli territory and were successfully intercepted by the IAF. And the Democratic presidential candidate Camilla Harris has hit out at her opponent and former US President Donald Trump over failing to release his medical records. That's after a report concluded that she was in excellent health and fit for the presidency. Well, in response, the Trump campaign claimed the 78-year-old has proved his competency through his extremely busy schedule. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. Now it's back to Camilla.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company this morning. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I hope to be joined by the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride, who's making his way across London and has been disrupted by a half marathon, would you believe? I'll also be joined by Robert Jenrick, the Tory leadership candidate who has made it to the final 2. Could the former Immigration Minister be the next leader of the opposition to replace Rishi Sunak? We'll see. And Labour MP Mike Tapp and pollster Scarlett Maguire will be joining us to unpick what Mr Jenrick has to say. And Paul Moorcraft is the author of Israel's Forever War and will take us through that conflict in the Middle East. But first of all, I'm joined again by Nicholas Owen. Nicholas, before Mel Stride arrives as he tries to make his way across town negotiating joggers and runners, let's have a chat about the Tory leadership race. You were just saying in the break that you thought the whole farrago around James Cleverly crashing out of that final round of MPs voting, even though he had been in the lead the day before, was extraordinary. What do you think happened?
Incredible. Well, it seemed to be sort of tactical voting gone mad, one way and another, combined with the accusation that Mr Cleverly spent too much time in the pub when he should have been out schmoozing his voters.
He did so well at conference. Everyone was loving this sort of barnstorming speech. He delivered it behind a lectern, whereas Badenoch and Jenrick both kind of freestyled in the vein of David Cameron.
Yes.
And he certainly was the media's favourite.
Yes.
Some people thought it was a bit too swaggering, that speech. And now he's out of it. What do you make of all of these criticisms that are coming from the sort of more wet end of the Conservative Party, that it's wrong to have 2 righties in the final race?
Well, yes, of course. I think they have bad memories of a previous, rather short-lived premiership, and they've got to now trust the membership, haven't they, again, and over to them. But now they've only got the 2 right-wing candidates to choose from. So suddenly they're saying,
do you think?
Well, it's a problem. I think for the Conservative Party, certainly is a problem. But what I love about it is that they're now saying we should change the rules. You know, well, you're going to change the rules before you finally have this election? Can you do that? I don't think you can.
What do you mean, change the rules to try and end up with a One Nation back in?
I don't know.
But why is there always this problem with the parliamentary party being at odds with the grassroots movement?
Well,
the grassroots have constantly favoured Badenoch and Jenrick.
Yes.
Tugendhat and Cleverly To be fair, Cleverly's popularity has increased over the course of the campaign. He's not done his career prospects any harm whatsoever. In fact, some people say that if Jenrick gets it or Badenoch gets it, they carry the can for a couple of years and then somebody else might come in for the general election anyway, and it could be Cleverly waiting in the wings. Nothing ventures, nothing gained. But why does the parliamentary party always, or some people in the parliamentary party, always want to sort of not let the grassroots have what they want to have?
Well, because of the Liz Truss experience.
Well, is it the Liz Truss experience?
Well, I think it's a lot to do with it, isn't it? And let's just be honest. The Conservative Party membership has gone right down anyway, as indeed has Labour Party membership. But anyway, that's another matter. Gone right down. The people that are left will tend to be the sort of people who go, well, what we need is we need to crack down on immigration. All the old the old Tory slogans that we all know so well, which. Fine. But if you do that, you're going to end up with the sort of candidates that the two that they've got.
Well, do you think there's something wrong with these candidates? I should put this to Jenrick.
No, not wrong with them. Of course, it depends on the point of view and whether you think that's going to be beating Labour in the very long term. And that comes back to something you and I just were talking about just before the news, wasn't it? It is going to be a very, very long time. And all this business about the opinion polls going so much against Starmer and so on. Yeah, well, you know, choppy waters. I tell you one thing. I wonder whether we'll have the same Prime Minister in Downing Street come the next election.
Really?
There's just a thought that I throw out.
Develop that thought,
I just wonder whether Sir Keir Starmer, who has many qualities, of course, as we know, and a very senior lawyer and all the other things, but he seems to bring to me the job to me that sort of legalistic approach to life. You know, he's got all the answers as long as they're written clearly on a script in front of him and so forth. Whether that can carry you through a premiership through such very, very difficult times, and you ain't seen nothing yet. No. We tend to forget the war in Ukraine is still rumbling on and dangerous at any time. We still haven't had Israel's response to Iran, which they're still promising. They're still talking about that, which might make everything that's going on in Lebanon look like a sideshow. Sorry to use that sort of language, but there are so many things liable to be going wrong in the next year or two. I just wonder whether that's really going to be the issue.
On Starmer, I'm intrigued by what you've said about him just in terms of kind of presentation flaws, perhaps. And you being a news anchor, you know all about presentation and communication. Is that his Achilles heel? I mean, you were saying earlier about you were quite impressed by Jonathan Reynolds, and some people have said in the past they're quite impressed, for instance, by Wes Streeting. They think he's a good media operator. Somebody softly spoken Scotsman, but still quite effective, is Pat McFadden. And then when you put Starmer up against these colleagues, he doesn't quite seem to be able to compete. Is that what you're getting at?
I think so, absolutely, yeah. And they always say, don't they, as soon as a Prime Minister's in office, the people who would like to be Prime Minister, they don't go away. Far from it. They'll be circling all the time. I'd put a little bit of money on Mr. Streeting, I must say.
I always describe him with affection as the most ambitious man in the Labour Party.
Yes.
Because he wants to go places. What about the women in Cabinet? What about Rachel Reeves, who's got this huge task on her hands come October the 30th to deliver the budget, the first budget by a Labour government. And by that point, it will be 15 years.
Yeah. Well, you made the point, didn't you, to the Business Secretary, you asked him the question, how can you be a government that supports trade unions and workers' rights on the one hand, but terribly keen to get capitalist investment on the other? Isn't that a sort of contradiction in terms? And I think our Chancellor is going up against exactly the same problem, that she says all the right things in terms of the economic arguments when it comes to growth and everything else, but at the same time is having to satisfy, look at the way the train drivers got that money, got their after all the terrible arguments about industrial relations with the railways, suddenly they got the money, just like that.
I'm looking across here because Mel Stride is entering the studio,
the man is here.
Negotiated joggers and runners and all sorts. Mel, sorry, well, unconventionally just...
I was not a jogger or a runner.
All right, sit down. We need
to
get your mic plugged in before we can speak to you. Nicholas Owen, thank you very much indeed for your insights this morning, for doing a little bit of an extended run while Mel Stride negotiated much more healthy and fit people. Mel, weren't you tempted to join in?
Not at all.
Put your joggers
I felt like running in the opposite direction, actually.
All right, well, let's introduce Mel Stride properly, who is the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, used to be the Work and Pension Secretary. You were in the Tory leadership race.
I was.
We had a lovely chat here.
We did.
And
It wasn't enough, Camilla.
These endeavours never end well, do they? Politics never ends well. Having said that, nothing ventured, nothing gained for you.
Absolutely, yes.
Who are you backing now, then? Because you had thrown your weight behind Cleverly.
Yes.
Cleverly's crashed out. Who will Mel Stride support? Because
I have not decided.
Oh, come on, Mel.
No, I genuinely haven't.
Announce it on this
if I
show.
had,
Come on.
I would have done you the courtesy on your show of telling everybody, but I have genuinely not
But
decided
don't you
yet,
like
so
the
I'm
look
going to
of
see.
Badenoch more than Jenrick? Because she has received some One Nation backing from Damien Green, famously Theresa May's deputy, very One Nation-y, very centrist.
Yes.
Does that then mean that she...
So Rob Jenrick's got Vicky Atkins, of course, and John Lamont and a few others. So I think there is a bit of a mix.
What's going on with these Tories? They're all over
no, I think what we all recognise is that whoever wins this contest, I think they're both two strong candidates that we have.
Are you happy with them both being righties? Because some people
what I was going to say, Camilla,
what
I was going to say, Camilla, is what matters now is that whoever wins brings the party together. So that means creating a balanced shadow cabinet. That's what I would strongly advise and what I would have done had I won
with a role
the contest.
for you in it.
Well, who knows? That is beyond my pay grade now. That is beyond my pay grade. So that remains to be seen. But no, I seriously, I do think there's enormous talent across the parliamentary party representing all the traditions of the Conservative Party, and that needs to be reflected in the shadow cabinet. And if a leader does that, then, you know, that's a big step forward.
I mean, I appreciate they're no longer MPs, but you know, the hissy fits that people like David Gauke and Anna Soubry have rightly prompted people to ask, well, why do you care? You're basically Liberal Democrats in blue clothing. Like, this is the problem with the Tories. Will this party ever be a nest of singing birds? You've got the One Nationers complaining that there are two righties, even though the Tory grassroots wants a righty or two to be put before them. Mel, this has always been the problem with the Conservatives.
So what we've got to do is we've got to move beyond this sort of labelling of left and right. And we've got to recognise that some of the issues that people, for example, have associated with the right, like lower net migration, like clamping down on illegal migration, like lower taxation, actually are common ground issues that the whole of the party can actually agree on. So we've got to focus more on what we agree on rather than one or two of the things that are more contentious.
We'll have to get the whole shadow cabinet to agree to leave in the ECHR. Good luck with that. If you were in the shadow cabinet, would you agree to that?
Hypothetical question, so we're not at that point yet.
No, I love a hypothetical.
I know you do. I know you do.
Just because it's my job to ask these questions.
Absolutely right to ask it, and I fully expected you to do so. Look, let's see where we arrive at. Of course, we don't know who's won this contest yet. We'll have to wait and see, and then we'll have to see what happens. But I am confident that both of those candidates are perfectly capable of bringing the party together and forming an effective shadow cabinet. So that I am confident of.
Should we talk about Jenrick's coming in shortly, and I'm going to ask him this, but what do you think about this suggestion that Jacob Rees-Mogg should be made party chairman? I mean, we love Jacob here, obviously, we're colleagues, but he did lose his seat in North East Somerset. Should we really be selecting a loser to be party chairman? Well, and indeed, a non-MP?
Well, look, we lost a lot of seats that were previously safe, and we can't start on with the premise that, you know, we've got to kind of stay where we are. We've got to expect to get those seats back. So I think under more normal conditions, if I can term it that, I don't think Jacob would have lost his seat, actually.
True.
So I think going
ironically, he's sort of forced out by Reform, even though he's right-wing and a Brexiteer.
You know, we live in very volatile political times, and Reform is now more of a force than it's been for some considerable period.
So good idea to have Rees-Mogg as party
I think, look, strong strengths there. So a well-known figure, somebody who within the membership has a distinct following. There's no question about that. Party chairmanship, of course, is about organisation and getting the electoral machine up and fired and running and well-oiled and so on. He has a strong business background, actually. So I would say those are skills that actually are going to be quite important. So I think some real strengths.
All right, OK, you seem to be quite supportive of that. Should we just talk about workers' rights? You're obviously, this is your brief. You've done a lot of work on worklessness. You've done a lot of work in the past when you were in government
welfare,
on benefits and welfare. Yeah, exactly. We've now got the Labour Party having tabled their workers' rights plan.
Yes.
We've got a bit of a farrago going on between the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, and the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, over whether P&O are indeed rogue employers. Would you have described P&O as rogue employers in a press release?
No, and certainly not on the eve of an investment summit in which that business had at that point pledged to invest £1 billion in the UK economy. And this is a general problem. So this investment summit has been shackled by the fact that, firstly, it's come before a budget, so everybody is wondering what taxes are going to be levied on businesses, and I expect there will be a number, possibly national insurance for employers, which will be a job destroyer.
Yeah, so Rishi Sunak came up...
And
what intel has Rishi Sunak got on this? Because he came up with this at PMQs. I put it to Jonathan Reynolds.
Yes.
It's fair to say he didn't rule it out.
Well, exactly, that's the point. And,
so you think they will put up employer NICs?
I think there's a risk of this. And let me say, Camilla, if they do that, if you read the Labour Party manifesto, it was very clear. It says that we will not increase national insurance. So unless you are going to argue that employer national insurance is somehow not national insurance, then they will be breaching their manifesto if they do that.
All right.
The fundamental problem was they boxed themselves in. They ruled out about broadly based taxes that raise about 75% of all the taxes raised in the UK. They told the British public that they had nothing to fear about us when it comes to rising taxes, and they're now in a position where they're going to do what they were going to do all along, but they've got a restricted number of options
Although,
now,
are you in a
many of
position
which
to
are
talk about
deeply
tax rises,
unsatisfactory.
Mel Stride?
Well, we
were
went
in government. You presided over
had
the highest taxes in peacetime.
We had COVID, we had a war in Ukraine, we had cost of living pressures, we've spent £400 billion supporting the economy and low-income households, and that inevitably, as in other countries, led to an increase in the tax burden. But we went into the general election, because of the welfare reforms that I was bringing forward, with £18 billion worth of tax cuts, focused actually on national insurance, employee national insurance.
Labour will say, but actually a $22 billion black hole.
Well, that is a fiction, and is part of their problem with the investment summit. Because if you talk the economy down, if you say that everything is doom and gloom, do not be surprised if business sentiment suffers. And what we've seen in all the so-called PMI surveys that we've had over the last 3 months is that is exactly what is happening. In fact, if you look at the long end of the gilt market, which is about interest rates, the amount that the government has to pay to borrow when it issues bonds, that has been going up as well. Now, there are international elements to that, but undoubtedly talking down the UK economy increases the cost of borrowing to the government. So it is not the right way to proceed, and definitely not on the eve of this investment summit.
Mel Stride, thank you for braving it through joggers and runners to make it into
I
the
will now amble
studio.
off slowly.
Amble off, maybe put a sweatband on, take some Dextrol energy tablets. And
even thinking about it is tiring me out. All right.
Thank you very much indeed to Mel Stride. As I say, I've got one of the finalists in the Tory leadership race coming into the studio next, Robert Jenrick. I shall be grilling him. You won't want to miss it. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in 3.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're joined by Lewis Oakley and Esther Stanhope. And Lewis, let's start with free gear Keir, shall we? It's been the story of the week, and apparently it's led to, well, calamity in the polls.
Yeah, so he has dropped by 26 points in the opinion polls. And, I mean, it's just been sort of going down from day one. He didn't even start that high. But, yeah, this is just bad optics. As we say, like, he hasn't done anything illegal or wrong. Everything was declared. But at the same time, you're telling people they don't get their winter fuel allowance and you're there walking off with your swag bag. It's just not a good look. And even, you know, I was thinking as well, the optics of them trying to clamp down on MPs having second jobs. You know, any of those could turn around and say, well, actually, we have to pay for our own clothes. I just think it's just bad optics that he's had. And, you know, we've got those comparisons of Sunak in the stands. He's just sat amongst the people. And
Prince William goes to Villa games, albeit in the director's box, but it's not an 8k per game seat. And by the way, can I just mention, this isn't just an isolated Labour incident. Since the start of their tenure, they were accused of filling the civil service with previous Labour donors, previous Labour aides, people who worked for Labour Together think tank. The civil service is meant to be politically neutral, and they bypassed a lot of procedures to get people into their positions, not least the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who parachuted Ian Caulfield, his name was, who donated £5,000 personally to her, and then he ended up in the Treasury with a 175k a year job. Yes, he did resign after it was revealed in the Times, but it does make you wonder, you know, you've spent years having a go at the Tories for this, and you do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's full of hypocrisy, and also the whole Sue Gray thing, and they were slagging off the Conservatives for not towing the line, and now they're being hypocrites because now they're taking freebies.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Robert Jenrick is in the House, Conservative leadership candidate, the man who wants to beat Kemi Badenoch, also the Tory MP for Newark. Mr. Jenrick, lovely to see you.
Good morning, very good to be here.
Full of beads now, you're in the final two.
No, it's very good, I'm very grateful.
So why should the membership pick you over Kemi Badenoch, who is, I think, still the favourite among the grassroots? Would you agree with that?
Look, I think it's neck and neck. If you'd asked that question 3 months ago when I was 66 to 1, then you would have said I was rank outsider.
Did you put any money on yourself at 66 to 1?
I didn't.
Shame.
No, I made that mistake. I don't believe in political betting.
No, I think some of your colleagues have got themselves into trouble in the past over that. But why would you be better than
on a
Badenoch?
serious note, I think I have the serious answers to the big challenges facing this country, whether it is on our borders, where I have a very clear policy proposal. That's let's cap legal migration in the tens of thousands and set it in stone by Parliament. Make it the law of the land. On illegal migration, let's leave the European Convention on Human Rights so that we finally end the farce of the small boats crossings.
You are absolutely speaking GB News' audience language on both of those issues, but they will rightly be cynical. They'll say to themselves, this lot have promised this before. They've promised immigration caps for time in memoriam, and in fact, immigration has only gone up. They'll also be sceptical that you'll be able to convince a big tent shadow cabinet when in office to sign up to both a cap on immigration and indeed leaving the ECHR. Mel Stride, who we just had in here, wasn't able to... I said, if you were in Jenrick's shadow cabinet, would you sign up to leaving the ECHR? Oh, well, this is all hypothetical, I don't really know. You're going to have a problem convincing One Nationers to do these things.
Well, firstly, that is why I trade in serious pods. I don't talk in platitudes, because I want to use this leadership election to settle some of these big questions, not just say there'll be a plan in months or years' time. Let's have a plan now, because the public, which is what really matters, are deeply sceptical about the Conservative Party because we failed to deliver on some of these issues in office. That's why I say not just we will bring down the numbers of coming here illegally, but we will have a cap set in law. And that's why I say we have to leave the ECHR.
No,
I do believe we can persuade...
It's hard to convince other Tories. This is a problem. We've already had, right, what I would call wets, One Nationers, throwing their toys out of the pram because it's a Jenrick versus Badenoch final. Oh, they're too right-wing. So you've now got to persuade some of these people who might be in your tent, and to be fair, both of you have got quite a curious mix of support. You've got Victoria Atkins, who would be considered a One Nationer. Badenoch, I believe, he's not in office now, but she's got the backing of somebody like Damien Green, who's associated with Theresa May. So I get all that, but this has been the problem for successive leaders. You can't convince everyone in the party to do what you want to do, not least if you're on the right.
Well, firstly, as you say, I have got a broad range of people from Victoria Atkins, John Lamont, Ed Arger, to Lord David Frost and Bill Cash and Jacob Rees-Mogg supporting me.
We'll get onto him
So I've built a broad coalition. But where I do differ with others in this leadership contest is I think we have to use the leadership contest itself to settle some of these big issues like the ECHR. Let the members choose. Then we can have a mandate and then unite around that. Because unity doesn't just come about because you wish it so. Unity comes about because you're uniting around something. And that's what I want to do. I want a very clear, specific policies, not just on our borders, also on how we reform our NHS. how we get growth going again in our economy, a different policy on net zero, how you get homes built for young people. I've got the clear answers to the big challenges facing our country. And with that, we've got something the party can actually unite around. And the philosophy behind those things, I believe, is true, enduring, conservative values.
So you can give a guarantee here today that you will not roll back on the tens of thousands cap or indeed the departure from the ECHR if you become leader. I say that because you did vote for Remain and now you're a Eurosceptic, so people might rightly be cynical about whether you can stick to your positions.
Look, these are things I feel very deeply about. Ultimately, these are the causes that I chose to resign from Cabinet about. So your viewers know that I'm willing to take a stand on the big issues that matter to this country.
Let's be honest, let's just go back in time. Did you resign from Cabinet over this, or did you resign because you knew you weren't going to get a big job in Rishi Sunak's reshuffle? You resigned a few weeks before that reshuffle.
Afterwards.
A few weeks afterwards, after that reshuffle in the December of 2023, right? You didn't get the big job. You wanted to be Home Secretary. He gave it to James Cleverly.
No, the reason I resigned, it was a hard decision to resign. Resigning from government is not easy on a matter of principle. That's the reason why I was the only person to do it in the whole
it wasn't because you weren't given a Secretary of State
I resigned
job.
because I had fought relentlessly for the changes that were needed to our legal and illegal migration system, and then I wanted to do more. And so I chose not to give up, but to go into the Parliament, go onto the backbenches and to work with 60 other Conservative colleagues to fight for the change we need. And the principal one, which was obvious to me then and is clear to me now, is that you have to get out of the European Convention on Human Rights if you want to get dangerous criminals off our streets, if you want to get terror suspects out of our country, and if you want to secure our borders. And if members of the Conservative Party vote for me in this leadership election, those policies will be the Conservative Party's policies. They'll be added to the stable of our party. If we win the next general election, we will get on and do them and end this farce once and for all.
One thing I'm not really clear on is your economic policies. What are the, say, three main tenets of your approach to the economy, or what will they be?
I want to get real growth going again in the economy, by which I mean GDP per capita, helping everyone in our country to earn more, not just the overall size of the pie. And I think you do that in a number of ways. Let's get millions of people off welfare into the dignity of work. Well, I want to do what we did in the early days of the coalition with the sick note culture once more, because we've got now far too many people, for example, medicalising normal human experiences under the guise of mental health. We've got to help those people into work.
How do you get doctors to not just sign sick notes because they've only got 10-minute appointments and, frankly, doing anything else is all too difficult?
Well, we have to work with them, just as we did once before under Ian Duncan-Smith. We've got to do so again with mental health. I want to give young people real skills, not just low-value degrees. And I've said we should close the worst universities in our country, turn them into hubs for apprenticeships. You know, 1 in 4 of our young people are leaving university and earning less than if they hadn't been to university in the first place.
But do you not believe in that Blairite ambition to get as many people into university as possible?
No, I don't. Because I did, but my parents both left school at 16. My dad was an apprentice. I would not be concerned. I'd be pleased if my children chose to be apprentices.
I know, but you're in a privileged position to be able to say this because, as you have revealed before, your grandparents paid for you to go to a private school. You did really well there. Then you end up, you know, being hugely successful. You were facilitated in that kind of upward trajectory. You're basically educated beyond your own parents' education because you had financial help. What about these kids who don't have financial help but have high aspirations and are bright enough to get to university? They should get
I want them to have all the opportunities they can access in life. But going to university is not the only way to do that. In fact, the evidence suggests the opposite. If a quarter of our young people are going to university and earning less than they hadn't gone to university in the first place, something is going badly wrong in our universities. And we need to take that on. Do for our universities what we did for our schools in the 2010s. The other big change that I want is to change our energy policy, because we have become fixated on net zero, and we're doing it on the back of working people.
So scrap net zero?
Well, I want to cut emissions, but I'm not going to do it by deindustrialising our economy. I want to pursue cheap and reliable energy. That means backing new nuclear. It means saying that gas is here to stay, even build new gas-fired power stations. Let's cut the subsidies for expensive renewables.
Kind of, ambition 2030, 2035, 2050. Do you want to just remove any arbitrary targets from a net
I would
zero?
go back to the Climate Change Act. I would change it so that we remove these crazy interim binding legal targets, the carbon budgets. I would certainly fight against Ed Miliband's mad plan to phase out gas by 2030. No serious person believes that's possible without doing immense harm to working people. So I have a plan to tackle our economy. I've thought deeply about this. And if I'm lucky enough to lead the party, these plans begin on the 2nd of November, not in months or years' time.
Those
a plan
comments,
tomorrow is not good enough.
Those comments on net zero are reminding me of Jacob Rees-Mogg, which brings us nicely onto your suggestion that he should be party chairman. So is that how this works? He supports you, you promise him a future job?
No, not at all.
Well, you must have promised him that job. What came first, the promise of a job or the endorsement?
Well, I'd like to think it was the endorsement, because Jacob and I... It was. Jacob and I have known each other for a very long time.
Right.
Jacob is a good Conservative. I've always respected what he's done, trying to get advantages from Brexit, trying to change our energy policy, for example, trying to deregulate our economy.
But the trouble
and the membership, he cares about the party and its members.
He lost his seat, so you're basically saying that a loser should help you fight the next election.
Well, he lost his seat like hundreds of other good Conservatives did because we failed to deliver in office. It was not because of the way he conducted himself.
Isn't there a standing MP that could lead the party in that regard, could help to be party chairman? Somebody like Priti Patel, for instance, why can't she be party chairman? At least she won her seat.
Well, I think the members will be very pleased to hear that a true Conservative who cares passionately about the grassroots of this party...
Oh, so you've done it so that the members are favourable to this idea?
No, not at all. Although, far be it that the chair of the party is someone who the members like and respect.
I know.
That would be a shock, wouldn't it, for once?
Well,
Let's have a chair of the party who the members actually like.
Say if he is chair of the party, will you just say to him, you start again, tear up everything that CCHQ has done wrong and start?
Yeah, I want to rebuild CCHQ from the ground up. I want to have a different way to select candidates. So we end the favoured sons and daughters of the leader being parachuted in. That was a disgrace.
Yes.
I want to stop members just getting emails asking for money but never asking what do they want and where do they want the party to go. Let's build a mass membership, democratic organisation. I think Jacob will be a great asset to that.
OK. Robert Jenrick, we have to leave it there. I had many more questions I wanted to ask you, but time is against us. Thank you very much. Good luck in the rest of the Tory leadership race. The result of that is going to be announced on November the 2nd. And, of course, GB News will be following the campaign all the way. And we've got Christopher Hope doing his hustings with Mr Jenrick and, indeed, Mrs Badenoch next week on Thursday. Coming up next, I'm going to be joined by the Labour MP Mike Tapp and Scarlett Maguire to analyse what Mr Jenrick has just said to me about his campaign. Stay with us.
Hello, here's the latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We're starting the day on a rather chilly note across the UK, some frost in places. It will turn rather unsettled over the next few days from the west, outbreaks of rain moving in, but all the while those temperatures starting to climb too. So back to the detail for today, and it's a chilly start, some frost to clear first thing, and we'll hold on to some showers across the northeast of Scotland through the day today. Quite a brisk north-westerly wind blowing here. Elsewhere though, after that chilly start, plenty of sunshine around before cloud starts to increase across most western areas there, and some rain reaching Northern Ireland by the end of the afternoon. Wherever you are though, temperatures are struggling, no better than 7 to 9 degrees in the north, up to 11 or 12 locally, 13 down towards the southwest of the UK. As we head into the evening then, those outbreaks of rain across many western spots will start to make inroads across Northern Ireland and the west and southwest of Scotland. But at this stage, early evening towards the northeast of Scotland there, plenty of fine weather, those showers tending to ease away. Then we run into that damp weather, as I say, across Northern Ireland and the southwest of Scotland. And further south though, across England and Wales, it's staying mostly fine at this stage. A bit of high cloud in across Wales and the southwest, but across central and eastern parts there'll be some clear spells as we go into the evening on Sunday. During the overnight period on Sunday into Monday, we'll hold on to rather wet weather out across westernmost parts, and it will start to make inroads across other western parts of the UK, also slipping in across England and Wales from the west into the early hours of Monday. So the best of the clear spells linger out towards the east and northeast. Here it will turn fairly chilly, but generally frost-free, and those temperatures starting to pick up from the west and southwest as those outbreaks of rain start to move in. As for Monday itself, well, a pretty wet picture is expected across England and Wales, certainly through the morning. Outbreaks of rain locally on the heavy side, starting to ease into the afternoon, whereas towards the north and northwest, patchy rain will tend to ease too, so a generally brightening picture as we go through the day. The best of the sunshine then reserved for the afternoon, and temperatures starting to pick up a little too. Into the afternoon was the highest towards the north of the UK, up to 12 or 13 degrees, up to 16 or 17 at best down towards the south and the southeast of the UK.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect And then you throw me into the mix, and trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm delighted to be joined now by Mike Tapp, who is the Labour MP for Dover and Deal and the pollster and director of JL Partners, Scarlett Maguire. Hello, guys. We're going to react now to Robert Jenrick's interview. I'm interested in what you have to say, Mr Tapp, because you're the new MP for Dover and Deal. He is speaking a very sort of tough game on immigration. He's saying that we need to have a cap on migration into the tens of thousands and we need to leave the ECHR.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be quite enticing to the constituents of Dover and Deal.
So what I say this, I find it intriguing that Robert Jenrick is coming out as the champion of securing the borders when it was him who was in the immigration minister role when we went from 400 crossing to 140,000. It was Robert Jenrick and the Conservatives that oversaw the opening of the borders.
He says he resigned on principle because he wasn't happy with those numbers.
Well, it was the Conservative government and he was the immigration minister.
Yes.
Labour have got serious policy for this issue. In just 100 days, we've established the Border Security Command. That's vital. That brings in the likes of MI5, those extra powers, the counter-terror tools, which is vital, and we're ensuring that we're deporting those that shouldn't be here.
Have numbers come down, though? No.
Well, actually,
no,
if you look at the September that we've just had, that's the lowest since 2020. We've stopped 17,000 crossing. We've had 12 flights off the ground, including the largest on record. That's a true deterrent, not silly gimmicks like Rwanda, which we saw 4 being deported. So we've got a serious plan, but it does take time to implement.
You wouldn't know if Rwanda had been effective because it was scrapped before it started.
Well, we do know that only 4 were deported. We know that it would have taken 99 years to deport all those that crossed in that way.
It was meant to
we
look
need serious
as if
policy
it was a deterrent rather than actually a practical solution, wasn't it? It was meant to put people off.
And a true deterrent is what Labour are doing now, which is those deportations that we're seeing, including the largest on record. And that's really important, I think.
Scarlett, I mean, generally, the electorate, do they trust the Tories or Labour more on bringing down immigration?
That's actually a really great question. I was just looking into the numbers for this for the last couple of days, and even though Labour had a sustained lead on this in the run-up to the election, now the Conservatives are just about overtaking or neck and neck, depending on where you look. So Labour's losing that lead and Conservatives are slowly starting to come up. I think it's an imperfect test in a way because most places that have been tracking this historically don't also ask the question of the Reform Party, which I think was probably a good thing to include.
Yes, exactly. Reform. I mean, that's also a threat to Labour voters now, isn't it?
Well, when you're looking at serious policy that's actually going to be implemented, you're not going to look to the likes of reform because we saw this in the general election. They'll say anything because they know that they're not going to be in government, so they're not going to have to deliver on those promises.
If boat crossings don't come down under a Labour government, OK, and let's be honest, it's been hard to do it under a Tory government, let alone a Labour government, where you could argue that perhaps the Labour Party isn't quite as ideologically opposed to mass migration as Conservatives might be. I think that's just a general...
Well, actually, if you look at our manifesto commitments, it's to secure the border, and we're working on that. But also when you look at...
made some remark about all immigration policy was inherently racist.
Well, no, that's not what he believes. And when you look at
he did say that once.
when you look at our policies around legal migration, it's not about putting numbers on it. It's about what does the economy need and matching those 2 areas.
If you do not bring these boat numbers down, then in a constituency like Dover and Deal, where people are confronted with this issue really up close and personal, actually Labour voters might well go to Nigel Farage and think that he's got the answers, not least if this Conservative leadership race doesn't pan out quite as everyone expects.
I have full confidence in Yvette Cooper and her team to deliver on these promises of securing the border. It's one of my top priorities, it's one of the Home Secretary's top priorities, and we've made it really clear, and I've been on here before and said this, that it's not racist to have these concerns, and we're taking it really, really seriously.
Okay. Scarlett, on the leadership race, first of all, do people care?
Well, some people care. The public as a whole don't particularly care, I think it's safe to say. There's been a few different polls that show that anywhere sort of about 2/3 of the public don't really care what happens in the Conservative leadership contest. I do think, though, the members care a lot, and they're the ones that got the vote over the next few weeks, and so there are people that care.
And who do the members... Because Jenrick is saying, oh, it's neck and neck. Is it neck and neck with the membership? I thought Badenoch was further ahead than him.
No, I think Badenoch was consistently further ahead and consistently the favourite with members when we thought about this Conservative leadership contest before it was even announced. In the run-up to the election, there were quite a few candidates already sort of touting their wares, I think, in anticipation of that result. And Badenoch was, I think, probably the clear favourite then with the members. I think one caveat, members are notoriously hard to poll. And it's quite difficult without wanting to do down my own profession. It's quite difficult to get that right. But at the moment, there are different polls that show Badenoch slightly ahead or Jenrick slightly ahead in head-to-head, so I think it's all to play for.
Interesting. Who do you think that Keir Starmer would fear more at the dispatch box, Jenrick or Badenoch?
I don't think either of them. It's quite interesting to see.
Hang on. Badenoch particularly made mincemeat of Angela Rayner a few months ago.
What I find really intriguing here is the Labour Party had a disaster in 2019, and we stepped back, we reflected, and then we went to the country with a serious plan. The Conservatives have completely failed to do that, but they're messing around with their leadership selections to the point where they haven't really got any choice here.
It may be, Mr Tapp, that you were elected on this loveless landslide purely because people were so fed up with 14 years of Conservatism. Not that many people, Scarlett, in the polling, were many people voting Labour because they absolutely loved Starmer and everything that the party stood for. They weren't. It was a punishment beating, wasn't it?
It was. It was to get the Conservatives out. The overriding message was the message for change, which Labour very successfully campaigned on. They say, you want change, we will be change. I think at the moment, the reason why you're seeing Labour struggle a bit, which I think they are, I think it's early days and they've got time to turn it around, but it's because voters aren't yet feeling or seeing, I think, even that plan for change. But we might see more of that from the sort of new change that we're seeing.
I mean, what do you make of this More in Common poll today that's in the Sunday Times, basically suggesting that now the Tories and Labour are neck and neck? Is that to be expected? I'd say that's to be expected after maybe a couple of years in office.
It's not easy.
Not after 100 days.
So the first 100 days have been quite interesting. We've actually delivered a lot. So if you look at the fact that our NHS doctors are back in work,
headlines.
Our NHS doctors are back in work. The trains are moving. We've set up the Border Security Command.
The pensioners are losing out on their winter
all these
fuel.
things are vital for laying the foundations for growth. But actually, the media are more interested in talking about Westminster bubble nonsense.
You cannot.
And actually, there's a lot going
this has
through.
been a great start to this government.
Actually, if you look at the legislation we're putting through in the policy, look at the bill for workers' rights.
Nobody's looking at it. They're too busy looking at Lord Alley, looking at the Starmer's wardrobe.
And why is that? And the reason for that is because the media...
the Prime Minister has made a series of catastrophic errors, including filling his boots with freebies and going to the Emirates Stadium every 5 minutes when he should be running the country.
It's because the media decide to amplify that more than they do what we're putting through. And I've seen this left, right and centre.
People like you would be on shows like this, absolutely laying into anyone doing the stuff that Starmer's been doing.
But what I'm saying is it's the media that are amplifying these parts. I'm not saying it's the media's fault. I'm saying they're amplifying those parts more than they are the legislation we're putting through.
Amplify good stories like people borrowing apartments from multi-millionaire Labour donors who then end up with Downing Street passes.
Isn't the Workers' Rights Bill a fantastic story for your viewers?
We have been covering... We have spent the morning with Jonathan Reynolds talking about that bill.
And we've seen an imbalance here between the reporting across the board.
Scarlett, how damaging has the first 100 days been on Labour in a nutshell?
I don't think it's been very a good start, but they've got time to turn it around. I do think they're in unprecedentedly bad territory for a new Labour government, but then so is the opposition.
Scarlett Maguire, Mike Tapp, greatly argued by both of you. Love a feisty panel, thank you very much. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be joined by Paul Moorcraft as he shares his latest book on the conflict in the Middle East. It's called Israel's Forever War. Will it go on forever? I'm sure we all hope not, but let's get his answer to that question. Back in 3.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Earlier this week, Olympic swimmer Adam Peaty finally proposed to his girlfriend, because I've been waiting for this, the daughter of Gordon Ramsay, with a gorgeous yellow diamond ring.
Yeah, so the demand for coloured diamonds in the last 10 years has soared by, guess how much, 77% between 2010 and 2019. Joining us now to tell us more about some of the hottest trends in the diamond world is dealer to the stars, Neil Dutson. Good morning, Neil. Morning, Ben. And I've got one of your exemplary examples. Look at this bad boy.
So
What's this one?
that's a very rare Muso Colombian emerald, and it's alpine green translucent, so it's a really stunning
See if we
colour.
get a close-up.
So yeah, so pretty impressive.
Can I be very crude and ask how much this is worth?
So value is £200,000.
How much, sorry?
£200,000. Now, the reason is its rarity. It's minor oiling. It's very, very, very pretty. The two diamonds on the side are D-colour, flawless diamonds, just to accentuate the setting.
Neil, how did you get into diamonds?
I studied diamonds in Antwerp. So
Wow.
Antwerp used to be the diamond capital of the world, really.
Yeah.
85% of the world's diamonds go through Antwerp, or used to. And now Dubai has taken over. And yeah, I just went to a school there. I learnt about diamonds, and I just didn't want to be seen off in the future.
Neil, I'm very concerned I'm going to drop 200 grand's worth of diamonds into my cup of tea, so can I give that back to you?
Absolutely.
But I can hold one if you like.
Oh, well, I've got
Neil.
a lovely one here.
Thank you.
So this is a fancy vivid yellow. It's 8 carats.
This is my dream ring, just so you know, for this hand. This would be
Is it big
amazing.
enough?
So what would I call this? A yellow?
So that's a natural fancy vivid yellow diamond. Value £300,000. So,
It fits
depends
like
where
a
you're
glove.
buying it from.
It
right?
fits like a glove, Neil.
Oh.
Maybe it's a sign. It's meant to be mine.
Definitely a sign, yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm joined now by Paul Moorcraft, who's the author of Israel's Forever War, Israel, Palestine and the Last Hopes for Peace. Paul, lovely to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining me. We've just marked the first anniversary of the October the 7th attacks. How significant was that event, do you think, for world politics, considering everything that had gone before?
Well, first of all, I'm buttered out from Cardiff this morning. It was very significant. It tore up the old deals, completely changed the Middle East. And I think people have appreciated entirely what's happening. We've got two wars, one in Europe and one in the Middle East, and both are growing. And if you just think of all the rockets that are being fired in Ukraine and also in Israel, if there were ballistic missiles fired at, say, Downing Street or Whitehall or whatever, there's very little that Britain could do. There are a few defences in the sea, but we have very little defence. So I was just thinking, when you were talking to the Tory party hopefuls, how many of them are preparing to do what's absolutely fundamental, that is the defence of the realm.
Why are you saying that in relation to the Tory hopefuls? Do you think that Starmer and some members of his cabinet haven't been robust enough in their support of Israel in all this?
No, you were just interviewing a Tory hopeful.
Yes.
The Labour Party and the Conservative Party have not concentrated on defence. They need to boost their percentage in terms of spend contribution to defence and to NATO. This is a very dangerous world at the moment. We're right on the tipping point. The war has expanded from Israel to Lebanon and Yemen, and it could go further. The real issue is what would happen in the West Bank if there's a third intifada.
Yes.
And there are so many, and also you can have the Turks getting involved in northern Cyprus. There's all sorts of things that could happen.
Yes.
By the way, I don't want to be too depressing on this morning. My book actually suggests there's a possible solution, and there are some areas of hope. Despite the terrible fighting, there are areas where there could be some possible solution.
OK, well, I was going to ask you about that, because you calling the book Israel's Forever War, I suppose, suggests that it might go on forever. Nobody wants that. So, yeah, let's end on some positive notes, Paul. Where are there the glimmers of hope, do you think?
Well, you could say Israel has been a perpetual permanent war since 1948, but it's got much more serious now. We're on the edge of a possible major war between dragging in America and obviously Iran. That is very, very dangerous. I don't know what the next step will be, but you asked me for hope. I shall try and give you some this morning. The one interesting thing is that on April the 13th, when Iran attacked first with drones and missiles, it was interesting, the response that the West had 4 or 5 days to prepare. And the Jordanians, the Saudis, the United Arab Emirates, all sorts of countries, besides the usual suspects, Britain and France, joined in the defense of Israel. That could be a starting point. Call me old-fashioned. In fact, some of the critics of my book said, you're a liberal, Paul. I've never been called a liberal before. It's quite interesting. But I'm a liberal, they say, because I believe in the two-state solution. It was a dead parrot, but it's not anymore. That is the only alternative to a perpetual war. And I explain how, in the book, how that group of nations, Arab and Western, were defending Israel. That could be the basis. But you have to, everybody in the Middle East practically hates Hamas. The Egyptians loathe them, they want them destroyed and so on. Jordan disliked them intensely. Hamas, but there has to be, once Hamas goes, what's the day after? How are we going to put a government in? And the part of that, and it goes into detail in my book, that the Brits, not many people may know.
Paul, sorry, we have to leave. We're going to have to leave it there, Paul. I'm so sorry. We've run out of time, but I do take your point that there is hope, but it does seem to stem from the destruction of Hamas, which is something that I think most people can unite around. Paul's book there, Forever War, Israel, Palestine and the Last Hopes of Peace, is out now. Well, that's me done for another day. I will be back next week, as ever, at 9:30 with yet more I think a leadership interview with Kemi Badenoch, fingers crossed, and much, much more. Of course, coming up next, it's Emily Carver, who's covering for Michael Portillo. Have a great Sunday, and I very much look forward to seeing you again next week. Don't forget those hustings on GB News, Thursday night with Chris Hope.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning and welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Quite a chilly day out there and fair bit of cloud around, although there will be some hazy sunny spells the further east that you are, with some rain arriving later though. But most of the UK under the influence of a ridge of high pressure, giving some fairly settled conditions. But out towards the west we do have some frontal systems and they will be giving some wetter weather in through this evening. So this is that area of rain already starting to give some wet conditions for Northern Ireland and parts of Western Scotland. But lots of the UK seeing fairly fine conditions. Dry for most, although a bit cloudy with cloud moving in ahead of this frontal system. Down the east coast though we do have those winds turning a little bit lighter and at temperatures quite chilly at best into the single figures across the north, milder though across the south, perhaps up to 14 degrees. Heading through this evening, so that generally fine conditions will continue for much of the UK. The far north of northeast of Scotland still holding on to some showers, but the eastern coast of mainland Scotland will see some fine evening sunshine before we start to see some rain arriving from the west. Again, a fairly cloudy picture for Northern Ireland and some of the western coast with outbreaks of rain. Further south though and across the southeast of the UK, largely dry, hazier sunshine, and we start to see this rain arriving from the southwest, giving some heavy outbreaks of rain through this evening. That area of rain will steadily move eastwards as we head through the overnight period. Winds picking up as well, so fairly blustery conditions across the southeast of the UK overnight. Further north though,